moves you. It could only be one place. Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, addressing the health, safety, and welfare of all children nationwide, because it shouldn't hurt to be a child. Here is your host, Tammy Stefano.
Hi, folks. What beautiful music that is. I love UBN Radio. Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us today on the National Safe Child Show. I have been away a couple of weeks, and I thank everybody for being so patient. I've received so many emails asking if I was returning and begging me to return because they didn't know where they would find the truth if we were not airing. So I will never, ever leave this until I breathe my last breath, or better put, until this problem is resolved, because that's what we really need, because I'd love to enjoy life in the normal world, you know, if such a thing exists nowadays, with all of the child abuse and what many will label the legal kidnapping from good parents that don't deserve to have their lives interfered with whatsoever. However, as we know and we've covered on several occasions, this is a financially incentivized situation happening right here, folks, not in a third world country, in the United States. And we do this show because we need to put a stop to it. It needs to stop. If we wonder at all, when we're watching tonight's news, tomorrow night's news, we look on any credible, reputable media source, we will see something about children acting out violently. Well, guess what? Children are pissed off and they're angry and they've had enough. And so it is up to us to prevent child abuse and to prevent children from being forced to live what they're identified by the child themselves, the victim, abusers. So without further ado, I have a fabulous guest on today. She is a Harvard graduate, and I'm going to let her tell you everything, but I'm so impressed every time I hear her say it, and she's very humble, and she's very hurt, and the system, the broken system that we're all very well aware of, is trying like hell to break this family, and we have to put a stop to it. And that's why she came on today. She tried doing it the nice way. She tried handling things. She tried sending letters. She has tried to do it in the way that the process allows a parent who sees and scratches their head and says, gee, something's going on here. When they try to do it that way, and they continue to fall down the rabbit hole, they come to a point where they say, hey, no more. My children are at risk. My children are in danger. They are bruised. There are abrasions. There are all sorts of things, and we're going to cover it today. Dr. Susan Evans, Beverly Hills, renowned from every national and local media source. Dr. Susan Evans, welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. When we talk, we're going to talk right in here because I want the audience. So if you turn, you can back up a little bit so that it's nice.
So you get nice.
Yeah. Because they will want to hear every word that you say, and you can move this. It's nice too.
No problem. So, listen, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
And I wish that you were here under circumstances in which we could laugh and we can talk about all of your expertise with skincare and what you've done to change people's lives from the outer perspective. And now your battle seems to be, how do you change an internal system that has failed you?
Absolutely. Well, you know, I've spoken all over the world about good health and beauty and being the best person that you can be, and I've tried to live it and teach it in my patients. Today, though, it's not that topic. It's my children and this problem and crisis that we're having here. It sounds like not in just my case, but you know, maybe throughout the United States.
And, well, throughout the world, actually. We get calls from throughout. There's not a country that doesn't have this problem, that we don't get emails. Parents, the system worldwide is failing. Today we're addressing a California state issue, but by no means is it only here. However, folks, you should know, if you don't, California has the #1 largest Department of Children and Family Services in the nation. So,
well, you'd like to think in America and even in California, where women have rights and children should have rights, that we would be protected.
Absolutely.
In comparison to a third world country or somewhere where you don't have rights or you're not protected.
That's right.
But I honestly feel like I'm in a third world country, because even as an educated mother and a professional and a doctor, there's not a thing that I can do to help my poor children.
You've gotten the best attorneys.
The best that money has to offer.
You thought this was a simple situation where it wasn't as if this mom, Dr. Susan, didn't have evidence. She had evidence.
Well, in my case, it's physical violence, and the onset of this is injuries, documented injuries, surgeries as a result of it. And not even reports from me, but my children's teachers.
Mandated reporters.
Mandated reporters, an arrest, and actual documented injuries, and a concussion in my son with the neurologist, and reports to the court. And even with that, my children were taken from me and denied any contact with me. Now it's been 9, almost 10 months.
You went through a period, so let's go back a little bit. You're educated. Give us a 30-second elevator speech about how deep your education goes and how grounded anybody would have to be in order to be able to state what she's going to state right now. You have to be a focused person.
Well, I was a native of Los Angeles, and I grew up here, but then my parents moved to the Atlanta, Georgia area, and I went to Spelman College there. Then my medical school was at Harvard Medical School, and I did my residency at NYU, and I did some fellowship training at Cornell in New York.
Wow. I mean, that's extensive. This is not a woman who doesn't know up from down, folks. This is not a woman who cannot navigate through a system, who cannot interpret what's being written, regardless of what it is. And what she was reading had her flabbergasted.
Well, I'll tell you, the system that I've navigated and studied all my life is about helping your patient, helping children, doing what's best for them in their best interest. And I was not equipped to be in a system that doesn't focus on that is not the priority.
That's right.
And I admit my naiveness in that area, because I would have never guessed that I would have to struggle and fight for what we do all the time as doctors.
Right, and you're not alone. I have shared a little with you that at this point, and I was thinking about it this morning, there was a story that came out about a police officer, I think it was in Oklahoma, and he targeted African-American women to rape them through oral copulation and through penetration. And all of these women he was targeting 50-year-olds. He's 30. He's white, male, half Asian. And interestingly, he targeted them, what appears to be, and what the general media is saying, because he knew that he could push them down. These people had a history of drugs, and that if somebody came forward, he knew that he was going to be the winner. He's a cop. He's white. The odds are against the African American people. Slavery is still alive, and it's not just with African Americans, because they have taken a whole group called children. And I couldn't help but think about that, because the profiler said he clearly has become more and more bold. He was getting less and less fearful.
So you're saying he targeted the most vulnerable in
Yes.
society, and that would be African American women in their 50s.
That's right.
Because he already knew that no one would stand up for them, or that their rights were not going to be
They
respected.
were afraid. He worked that beat. But when I thought about that, I thought about the boldness, what the profilers were saying. I have such an interest. We had a world-renowned criminologist come on last month that we love, Dr. Scott Bond, and people become more bold. But in this case, it seems as though CPS has become more bold. There was a time where they wouldn't consider going after a celebrity, after a Caucasian family. They had a target, and it was the African-American socioeconomically disadvantaged families. Well, that time, folks, is over because they've become bold, and they've become bold because nobody is in a position to stop them. Not yet.
Well, in my case, my ex was actually an expert witness for DCFS.
And I want to touch on that because I can't help but think about it. I think it's actually woke me up in the middle of the night. What exactly is his expertise?
He is a plastic surgeon. And as a plastic surgeon, he was employed, or he's been employed for about 14 years by the Grossman Burn Center. And what they do, and it's a great facility, they take care of burns. And unfortunately, in some child abuse cases, the child is burned. And so you frequently find burned children there. And you're going to take your children or anyone who's burned to the Grossman Burn Center. And as a result of the follow-up or any charges that are pressed with the father or mother or whatever the case is, they'll ask my ex to be the expert witness.
And what exactly is he giving expert testimony about? Because, I mean, I'm a layperson in that field, but I would just think that he could give expert testimony about what the costs will be, maybe to, repair skin grafts or what have you, the long-term effects, the percentage of ability to heal, perhaps, the resilience given the child's age.
Yes.
But I've taken so many courses on child abuse, and unless he is giving expert testimony about that, I'm a bit concerned that a plastic surgeon is being used by the Los Angeles Department of Children, Youth, and Families if he's giving expert testimony about child abuse per se.
Well, what you're saying is a good question. Like, is he trained for forensics? Can he say that this is definitely child abuse? But I think more so what it's used as, just as a doctor, how extensive the damage was. I mean, was it a triple layer, 2-layer, first degree, second degree burn?
Okay.
And so in a forum like Children's Court, when they're, looking at the parent, how extensive was this abuse?
Right.
It's relevant to him to comment if it was a severe burn, medium burn, if he had to graft, or whatever the case is. I don't know that he can comment on the criminality of it.
Okay.
But needless to say, it's an extensive amount of work that's done with the social worker, and he works with the social worker every day, pretty much for about the last 14 years. So.
Okay. And my thinking is he's got them in their back pocket. I mean, with all due respect, nobody's going to come into UBN and tell them that I'm not a good advocate for exposing child abuse because it's not going to work. In the same right, it would be very difficult for somebody after 10 or 14, 15 years to go to the department and say, your expert is now being labeled the abuser.
Right. And it's especially difficult when it comes to child abuse because even in spousal abuse, these abusers are smart enough to know that they don't reveal that side of themselves to their coworkers.
Right.
And most certainly, if you're looked at to be the expert in other abusive cases, the last thing that you want to do is say that this person himself is abusive.
That's absolutely right. And what would that do to their credibility? Perhaps everybody, we have to realize that it doesn't matter. Listen, they took President Clinton and they said, we are looking at this now and we're making these allegations through Monica Lewinsky because It was a real allegation. Let's just call a spade a spade. And it doesn't matter who it is. If you do something wrong and somebody calls you on it, then there has to be entities set in place to be able to offer the victims relief from the continuing of being victimized. But there has been no relief for you.
No, but I'll tell you one other thing, and I will admit, part of it was my inexperience. Like, I've never dealt with CPS.
Of course.
I've never had to make a report for abuse. My ex was arrested for injuring me and for assaulting me and for abusing my children. And he, different, was ready for any kind of interviews with CPS. He knew the buzzwords. He knew how to carry himself.
Of course, he's been with them for 10, 15 years.
Exactly. And so I'm sure he presented very well and very convincingly
sure he
to
did.
them also.
Do we have somebody on the line, John?
Well, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. We're waiting. We're gonna bring an expert, a real expert, who does have the credentials to back up his knowledge with child abuse right here in Los Angeles, recently retired. So we are very excited because as a real expert, we'd like to ask him his opinion on some of the facts that we're going to be presenting today, because we all sit scratching our heads and saying, can this be? Wait a minute. Are we really in the United States? A land, the land of free, the land to be able to freely parent your children. But you can't freely parent your children right now.
No, I cannot. I'm denied of my constitutional rights to be a mother, to be with my children, and to raise them. And I am not an abuser. I don't use drugs. I don't drink.
No criminal history?
No criminal history. Never been arrested.
Never did a Britney Spears thing? Or
No Britney Spears thing. No,
okay,
I was studying in medical school. I didn't have an opportunity. And it doesn't matter. It does not matter when the system has decided that
Your
they're
number
going
is
to
up.
peg you as whatever they are. And it's just really sad to be a mother and not be able to help your children and not be able to provide them with a safe place.
That's
and
right.
do what mothers are supposed to do for their children.
That's absolutely right.
Not to mention what it's doing to them.
More so. I mean, as adults, even though my heart bleeds for so many stories, every day, I mean, the stories come in quicker than anybody is possibly able to handle it. But the children are suffering greatly, and they have no voice. Folks, they have no voice. In family courts here in California, they will sometimes, and it's all at the discretion of the judge, and pray that you don't get a bad judge, and we're going to touch base on that. Pray that you have a good judge that's open, that truly does care about the best interests of the child, enough to say, gee, I'd like to hear the voice of the child. I'd like to hear, because I do have experience, and I will be able to make a discernment as to whether this child is being coached, as that word is so used in such a disrespectful way at this point within the court system. I mean, they have taken out any validity of what coaching could potentially mean and does potentially mean, because they use it as a means to keep children away from protective parents. If you allege abuse, and I stick by this until I can see dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of cases where the parent didn't allege abuse and they were never separated from their children. I've yet to find any cases like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've gotten support from the Family Violence Appellate Project, and they are a group of attorneys that actually are located in Berkeley, and they discovered that 54% of the women that report violence, domestic violence, along with their divorce or whatever case it is with custody, lose the custody, and it goes to the abuser. And oftentimes, the mother is actually placed on supervised visit. And in my case, was denied any contact whatsoever with the children almost a year. And this is unheard of.
Was that a court order that you were denied, or did the court give a specific time that they felt? Well, let's touch first. Who was the judge in family court? Let's name him.
Okay, his name is David Cunningham III.
Well, 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 Judge Cunningham, why aren't we surprised that yet another case comes before us in which you, sir, have acted in such a faulty and cruel way, and that you have, in fact, and we are looking into this now, and we are going to hold a press release, a press conference for Dr. Susan Evans, because enough is enough. And we are going to name you, Judge Cunningham, and not because we are against judges. On the contrary, we have many good judges who we also name. Judge Keeley and Van Nuys.
There's nothing better than a good judge.
We
honestly.
need good judges, and you know what? When you take that position, you don't have a choice according to the standards, but evidently, along with all the brazen behaviors of these entities, there are certain judges, a handful, maybe more, that feel that they are above the law, and they take on this godlike persona where it's their courtroom. And I want to remind you, sir, it is not your courtroom, it is mine. As a taxpayer, that is my courtroom.
So you're familiar with Judge Cunningham and his rulings with children?
Absolutely. And we have come across many cases in which he has taken children away from protective parents. And it seems to be that the only evidence that is brought forth in which he makes these rulings is the fact that there were allegations of abuse that a failed system called Department of Children and Family Services deemed unfounded for a variety of reasons, none of which are really validated, because as a lay person and many other lay people, it was very obvious that there was abuse.
Well, in my case, I had a documented injury, a medically documented injury that required surgical repair. It was reported not by myself, but actually, unfortunately, my daughter's first grade school teacher, because of the abuse she suspected with my daughter and to his spouse. And he was arrested. Law enforcement investigated it and felt that the children and I were in danger, and they took him in. And even in a case like that, they said no founded physical abuse, which is beyond me.
CPS, you're a failure. You're a failure, and you are the worst danger to any children. Not all of you, though, because I do have some great friends that work for the department who I honor, and they do actually protect children. Unfortunately, they are never given these cases anymore, and they become either administration, and I don't know if you know this, Susan, or not. And folks, I want to remind you again, as I often, or I have in the past, 70, and this is right from the spokesperson for the union, for DCFS, 22% of the 7,000 employees within Los Angeles County are the ones who actually go out and meet the people, while the other 78% never meet a parent, never read a case, and in fact are just pencil pushers who sit in the backdrop. 22% out of 7,000 for the largest department in the nation. Folks, this is a problem.
It is a problem, and these are the people that are set out to protect children from domestic violence.
That's right.
There is no separate police force or task force, which I actually think would be ideal, because they're trained to deal with violence and deal with criminals, and domestic violence are criminals also.
That's right.
But unfortunately, you'll have people that aren't skilled, that aren't trained, investigating situations without a medical background. In my case, for instance, my ex ran circles around the social worker who wasn't licensed, or at least the ones that were on the case, and was able to, manipulate them in whichever way possible. Whichever
way he wanted to benefit him, not to benefit the children, folks. There were allegations. CPS, an ER worker, or several, looked at those allegations, did an investigation. Did dependency court take this on, or did they dismiss?
Well, I have to say that the emergency social workers, there were 3 of them.
Okay.
All of them were better trained. One was a ex-law enforcement agent herself.
Okay.
And they all investigated and they all found abuse.
They found abuse.
Found abuse.
Did they ever write about it?
They did.
Were there any documents that they ever wrote in order to inform? Because remember, folks, the ER workers, they're the face. They are the ones who are seeing it firsthand. They are part of that 22%, okay? And without them, nobody knows what's going on, like in Gabriel Fernandez's case that we covered. And so they found abuse, and they founded it, right?
They did find abuse, and
so it was substantiated.
One tried to substantiated. One tried to detain the children. The other one worked with a deputy sheriff and issued an emergency protective order for the children.
Okay.
And the other, was writing an 8-page report about the other things that she found in the file that were overlooked and felt that the children should have been detained.
They were at risk
a long time ago.
They were at risk.
Oh, yes.
And they all 3 ER workers with more experience than the other ones, they put this down on paper. But did one of the social workers, when she went back, she's still on the case, did one of them suddenly discover that within this internal system where everything is documented, her notes, 8 pages, were gone?
Well, there's the presentation to the court about you once a child is detained from you. And in that, you're supposed to get all of your DCFS or child services files and all of the findings. They were not in there. The 8-page report where she had discovered that there were things that were overlooked, expressed her concern as an ex-law enforcement and a psychologist that the children should be protected, that wasn't there. Nor was the social worker that tried to detain the children. That information was not there. Nor was another one who did a safety plan and actually recommended the children be protected and that my ex be limited to monitored visits, get anger management and parenting classes. None of those were part of my file.
So it would be fair to say that the people who went out, who are qualified, who were at the onset of this, were pretty much disqualified, taken off, and then more social workers came on. As if we need 6 social workers, folks, for one family. Hello, while you're complaining about overages of cases, maybe you should not take such an interest in a celebrity figure and instead look at the safety of children as being your first and only interest. But that wasn't the case. The good guys, and there always is, got taken off, and then some bad people came on. They were probably handpicked, with all due respect, because they were all for your ex.
Well, and I do want to take time and let you know how much I appreciate the social workers or the groups at the Child Protective Services that are real child advocates.
Yes, me too.
And they're about protecting children.
That's right.
And unfortunately, the bad ones make a bad name for everyone.
That's right.
But it went back to the case social worker who was essentially on the case for about 2 years, and she was, working, interchanging with, like 2 other social workers, the same 3 that my ex refers to as his 3 queen bees, and threatened my children that no matter what he does or what they report, that his queen bees are going to mark it as unfounded, and they'll never see their mother again.
You had an order. Everything eventually got dismissed, correct? It went before a judge at dependency court, and he said, I have a full caseload. He didn't say this, I'm not quoting verbatim, but pretty much, I've got a full caseload. What the hell are you doing bringing me this nonsense?
Well, I don't know what the budgets are like in children's court, but I'm sure that it's challenged like everyone else. And in my case, there was absolutely no evidence of abuse. Even the accusations that were made were not placed in there. And also, there's the fundamental error of a change in custody or removal of the children from me. And the children had a restraining order that was granted by a judge protecting them from my ex. So it was illegal in addition to that. So this is the kind of case that you could imagine that Children's Court saw and said, I'm dismissing this, and they did something called dismissed it with prejudice, which I'd never been familiar with.
Which is fabulous.
Which means never again can they make these
do not come back to me with this
allegations about me as a mother.
That's right. And just to be clear, folks, when she said they recognized that there was no abuse, she is specific to allegations that she was involved in abuse, that she was the abuser, when in fact there was lots of evidence of abuse by Brian Evans toward the children. So I just want to be clear. The problem was, once again, through the corrupt workers, whoever they may be, and we will find out and we will name them, they hid reports, they hid evidence, they suppressed it, as we commonly know. So just to be clear, when Dr. Susan says that, it was how they tried to flip it around and say, lynch her. But the judge saw through it, and thank you. What is that judge's name?
Judge Vasquez.
Judge Vasquez, thank you for being honorable, because that is your title. And in the same token that we point out bad judges, we want to not thank you for being on somebody's side, but thank you for doing what in fact you have been put on that bench to do, and that's to have the wisdom and discernment to look at all of the information as a whole and make a sound judgment. Thank you. And so Judge Cunningham.
Well, and speaking of Judge Cunningham, I do want to say that his order, as unfair as it was only for 30 days, no contact.
So 30 days, Judge Cunningham says, in a nutshell, and you're not the only one that we have evidence that he's done this to, these kids need to be apart from mom a little while because they need to bond with dad. Gee, did they not have a bond? I mean, here's this father who's coming up claiming he's Father of the Year, but there's not a bond. That's always something that we need to look at, folks. And the judge clearly saw that. Thank you, Judge Cunningham, for seeing that. And then 30 days, but 30 days.
By that time, my ex, with the power or his affiliations with DCFS and his Queen Bee social workers at that point had control. So they essentially extended what Judge Cunningham had an order for just 30 days and gave a clause that after 30 days that it could be modified. So that was not an option, though, in a situation where the children were detained and they were with DCFS. And that's when my ex extended it, essentially.
Did they get put in the custody of DCFS? Did they go to a foster home?
Well, my oldest son went to a foster placement. Okay. All 4 children were given to my ex. And again, in Cunningham's defense, he did not give my oldest son to my ex.
He didn't give custody.
He didn't give custody to him. And he gave him an option because he did testify with Cunningham about being pushed down by my ex, and he sustained
physical abuse. He testified to physical abuse, being dragged, and God only knows, because children, as we know, have a habit to minimize. They don't remember the details like adults to go through step by step. But it was enough that this child was fearful, and it was in fact him. It was he, I should say, that made the report, wasn't it?
It was. Well,
didn't he make a phone call?
Well, he did. Initially, he tried to call 911 because he was there when I was injured and I had a severe problem with my wrist and severe sprain.
You were abused, assaulted. There was domestic violence that you had just incurred.
Well, yeah, and we had a long history of it. I mean, this family has been in counseling for my ex's anger and his rage and his violence for 3 or 4 years with a psychologist, and how it's affected the children, and it's horrible. It just hadn't gotten to the point where I was physically injured.
Right.
And once that happened and I saw how it was affecting the children, then I realized that this has to come to an end.
And you filed for divorce.
And I filed for divorce for the safety of the children and I. Where my mistake was looking at family court as a venue to protect the children. And I hope no one will make that error and think that you should handle those issues in the criminal court, and don't expect family court in the current situation to protect your children, because it's actually the opposite.
That's really sad, folks, that we're here in the U.S. and we have a family court system that hasn't been around for a long time. And we now have parents looking at family court with the same disrespect in which they are now looking at the department. If we look at our court system as such a failure, where are we to go?
And it's difficult for the judges, because this social worker came to the family court hearing and testified that
Who called her to go to the hearing?
My ex.
Did he put her on a witness list?
She was, I'm not sure if she was on the witness list, but at the time she definitely, was sworn in and made a testament testified under penalty and perjury that there has never been any founded abuse from him. And
did she not take the time to see any police reports? She obviously ignored
them, but I don't know what she viewed. But the other social workers that were aware of the abuse definitely wanted to speak, but unfortunately I wasn't allowed to present that evidence. And so,
wait a minute, we're not in a criminal court where the evidence rule is so weighty. You were not allowed to present evidence of abuse?
No, I was not. There was some clause from the very first hearing.
Who brought this clause up?
Well, my ex's his attorneys.
They brought the clause up, and are we to think or to believe or to know that Judge Cunningham adopted what they said?
Yes, he did. He agreed with it. And this is over my attorney's objection that, to deny a mother and children the right of mentioning or entering evidence of abuse, of injuries. This goes against what protecting is all about and the Domestic Violence Protection Act. But despite his objections and how this would go to fly in the face of what domestic violence really is, he was denied, and I was not allowed ever to mention this in the court.
Now, we know, folks, that there's a 5-year clause within the family code where if there is abuse with police records or some evidence, that the family courts are supposed to take that as one of the strongest considerations when determining child custody. And typically, the code states that the children should not go with the person who has been identified as abusive. But that didn't matter, because they said pretty much, we're not letting you get anything in here, so we don't have to worry about that code. I mean, I'm kind of summarizing, but that's the feel I'm getting.
Well,
if they don't allow you to say it, then they're not responsible for upholding it.
Precisely. And that evidence was not allowed into the court. And that, I think, is probably the single biggest error in the single instance that left my children and I vulnerable for continued domestic violence, continued abuse, and has my family in this horrible state now where I can't even protect my children. And it could have been avoided.
I wanted to talk about some diagnoses that your children had, but then I thought, for the sake, because I do have a lot of experience, for the sake of protecting, because they will use this against you, for the sake of protecting the children from undue harm for whoever sees the show, I have thought that it's best to not point out specifics, because I have seen the department use that very fact and medical evidence against parents. So we're not going to do that. And we don't want to embarrass the children if their friends see it, and that's what the department will use. So, but we are going to say, and we're not saying any minors' names on the show, but it would be fair to say that these children, would it be fair to say that the children have been in so much danger that there have been hospitalizations both psychiatrically and physically?
The children are in danger, and they still are today. And
they still are.
The worst thing about it is they've lost faith in the system
They don't feel that there's any protection for them.
As the police sort of yield to DCFS, that's just kind of how it's done. And so they don't feel the police will help them because the social workers have heard what's happened and investigated it and didn't protect them.
Did you ever have any police officers involved? Did the police ever get involved?
Well, to a degree, when they arrested him, when they took pictures of my injuries, and I had a police officer, there was 2 deputy sheriffs that issued an emergency protective order protecting the children.
Did they pretty much, in your opinion, do you feel as though, or did they ever make any comments towards the direction of, we know what's happening, and our hands are pretty much tied because this goes into the hands of Department of Children and Family Services. We can't really take this on.
Initially, I was really encouraged to pursue the criminal route because the arresting officer felt like if he didn't arrest this time, he said he felt like the next time he came back, I wouldn't be alive. He caught it in the throes of the domestic violence, which they wear 2 faces. Yes. It is a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yes, and they present so well. They present better than somebody who never abuses. They are so charismatic and smooth talking that unless you have a video camera going during the abuse or going 24/7, it's really hard. And there's nothing to bring them to that point of abuse. Sometimes it could be as simple as looking for a set of keys.
Well, that's true. You never know what triggers. And what I found out after my ex was arrested is that he explained that his anger and rage came from his own abuse or sexual molestation between ages 6 and 12 that eats at him every day. And apparently it was pretty regularly done in his home because it's usually an offender at home. Apparently he and his sister and also, I believe, his father fathered a child with his aunt. So it was replete with, abuse in that home. And it was surprising because I'd been married to him for a while and we'd been in counseling. We always wanted to know, what is this anger and rage that you have? And
where is it coming from?
He never revealed it until after he'd already been arrested. And this was along with a plea to, he couldn't, to not go really hard on him criminally and that he would have to kill himself because he couldn't survive.
I don't know if I believe you, Dr. Evans, and I say that respectfully because if it did in fact happen to you, I'm so sorry that it did, and I'm sorry for every child that has to endure abuse. But right now, because you are much older, and unfortunately, nobody addressed you, and that's why you used that as a means for a lesser frowning upon you. Would you please consider that now, as these children are feeling no different than perhaps what you felt, screaming internally for somebody to help and nobody was there? Because what you're doing right now, whether you are conscious or not, is you are perpetuating a cycle that is exactly what you went through. And you don't want them, when they then adopt these abusive mannerisms, to be 40, 50 years old and say to police as they're being handcuffed, stop, you don't know what I've been through, and I'll just kill myself if I have to do this.
Well, yeah, and he also promised never to force the children to come with him, and he was going to get help with anger, and we were seeing a specialist for male survivors of sexual molestation who recommended inpatient therapy for him, and he promised that he would do that. And so for women, no, absolutely not. Yeah. And
we're running out of time. I want to cover some more things, and there's never enough time. I hate that. We need hours.
Well, I will come back.
Oh, yes, and I will be having you back. So I'm going to be working exclusively with Dr. Susan. We're going to bring in some experts. We're going to navigate through this. We're going to get the documents. We're going to lay everything on a nice, big, round table with real experts that understand child abuse, and we are going to get to the bottom of it. And whoever is responsible during the press conference, we will have to call you out because you have made an error that is putting children in harm's way. 30-day order from Judge Cunningham turned into how many months?
It's 10 months. It's almost a year without any contact. And these children don't have a telephone.
Wait a minute. Any contact? What do you mean they don't have a telephone? Their father's a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills, correct?
Right.
Wait a
Well,
minute. Are you saying he doesn't have a phone, or he just wouldn't give you the number?
he did not have a telephone in the house. What my son sent out a help me Facebook, and he said he was threatening me and all these things. And the response from his friend was, "We'll call 911." And his response was, "I don't have a telephone. There's no phone in the house."
Hold on, folks. We know that abusers will isolate their victims. We have the horrific details of children that are abducted and hidden for 10 years, locked in a place. Is this any different? A child does not have a telephone, and a plastic surgeon in 2014 in Beverly Hills, no phone? How long did he not have a phone for these children to be able to reach out? What if a fire happened? What if there was an emergency? What if dad passed out? And how old is your oldest?
He's 13 years old.
And how old is your youngest?
He's 7.
Kids, we don't know if you have a chance to see this. I want you to say a message right now to your children in the event that they are able to see this. Look right into the camera, and they are standing right there on the other side. What would you say to your children?
That mommy is working every day to hold up to what I promised is, if you tell me the truth about what's going on, then I will protect you. And unfortunately, mommy is fighting a system, and that I want everyone to work together to change so that when children report things, that we can protect them. And there are good people out there, and we do care, and not to lose faith, and to remember God will get them out of this situation. And there's people like you and several other good judges and good social workers that can work together and make a change in a system that is not protecting you. And I love you.
She loves you very much. Children, I can't tell you how highly your mom speaks of you, and how every waking moment when I get a call from her, or 2 o'clock in the morning when we're still talking about you, you are never out of her mind for a moment. And even though it doesn't seem like she has any power, she is building up a powerhouse. So just the best that we can say right now is just hang in there. Do your best, and we know that you are. And know that we will not leave you. And Mommy hasn't left you, even if it seems like that.
Not even for a second.
Not for a moment in the day. Folks, we will post about the press conference, and we ask any mother, you pay about anywhere, average $1,000 a week under supervised visits to see your children. You have a new judge now.
I do have a new judge, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to get the custody addressed.
Has she heard anything, or?
She's not heard anything. I'm in a position between leaving children's court and him dismissing it, and then again going to family court to address these orders that were written that are still in place from a year ago.
Folks, the judge's name is the Honorable Judge
Tamara Hall.
Tamara Hall.
And I have great hopes that when she does
Tamara
get a chance to hear
Your
this.
Honor, we are counting on you to navigate through, to not follow in the footsteps of the prior judge simply because it's easier and your caseload is full. There are cases, unfortunately, that will come before you as you sit on the family law bench that are horrific. And we honor you, and we ask you to please look with more, look a little closely at these cases because they are horrific. We'll have a press conference within the next week, folks. We will post it.
And we all have to work together, even
Yes.
those who don't have domestic violence in your family or any kind of abuse with your children. It's not enough that you're not experiencing it. And I say that as a doctor and as someone who was totally unaware of this aspect of society, because I would have been active in trying to help it. And once my children are saved, and they will be,
Yes, they will.
I want to work to help this gap, this problem that's leaving children abused and not having any protection. And I want them to learn to be able to speak up, and that adults will help them and save them.
And she has some fabulous attorneys who are looking as well.
Yes, we do. We have right now I have a special appearance attorney, and she is very much highly respected and renowned attorney Margot Boucher, and she does special appearances with me, and she is caring, and she is highly respected in the law, and she does it the right way, and I'm so glad for her help.
And we're gonna ask our legal analyst, Jennifer Ani. We have to always mention Jennifer because we love her and honor her, and she is just a bulldog in the courtroom. We're going to ask her also to take a look at this case and to offer her expertise. We love you, folks. We will see you soon. Thank you for joining us. UBN Radio, the National Safe Child Show. Thank you, Dr. Susan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We honor
It's great
you,
being
and
here.
we're in this. We're in it to win it, folks.
Yes, we
God
are.
bless.
Thank you for listening to the National Safe Child Show on UBN Radio. For past episodes, visit the archives on ubnradio.com. And for more information, go to nationalsafechildcoalition.com. The views and opinions expressed in these radio programs are those of the individual hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of Universal Broadcasting Network.